Spain on behalf of the European Union.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the Republic of Serbia, align themselves with this statement. I reiterate today our conviction that the economic, commercial, and financial embargo imposed by the United States on Cuba has a damaging impact on the country's economic situation and negatively affects the living standards of the Cuban people. We should not forget that external trade and foreign investment can play a crucial role in setting the country on a path towards modernization, reforms, and sustainable growth, and help it to overcome the economic hardship caused by external events, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, which continues to affect the island, or regular meteorological and climate change-related hazards. Consequently, the EU believes that lifting the embargo could make economic reforms more effective and facilitate the opening of the Cuban economy in the benefit of the Cuban people. We remain concerned about the human rights situation in Cuba, in particular following the events on the 11th and 12th of July 2021, following the severe rulings handed down by Cuban courts hitherto, as regards civil and political rights. Consequently, we reiterate our appeal to the Cuban government to fully grant its citizens internationally recognized civil, political, economic rights and freedoms, including freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and free access to information. We call upon Cuba to release all political prisoners, to ratify the UN Covenant for Civil and Political Rights and the Covenant for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and we call upon Cuba to extend a standing invitation to all UN special procedures to visit Cuba. We strongly insist upon the importance of upholding the UN Charter and of respecting the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all UN members. And we urge Cuba to stand in full solidarity with these fundamental principles and to work together to defend them. Moreover, we firmly believe that empowering civil society is vital for the promotion and protection of all human rights, and we call upon the Cuban government to open spaces for constructive and inclusive dialogue without preconditions with the full spectrum of the island's civil society. A broad spectrum of civil society, both Cuban and European, should also be involved in the implementation of the EU-Cuba Political Dialogue and Cooperation Agreement, the PDCA. The EU believes that the path to positive change in Cuba is closer engagement on all levels, government, economy, civil society, but positive change can also be brought about through people-to-people exchanges. Consequently, we welcome the measures announced by the U.S. administration last year to ease restrictions on family remittances and travel to the island, and to fully resume consular services. However, the redesignation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism by the previous U.S. administration without the presentation of any new facts, and Cuba's maintenance on the list without obvious justification, the economic interests of the European Union. We have firmly and continuously opposed any such measures due to their extraterritorial application and their impact on the European Union, and this in violation of commonly accepted rules of international trade. We cannot accept such measures impeding our economic and commercial relations with Cuba. The EU strongly rejects the US's activation of Titles 3 and 4 of the Helms-Burton Act in April 2019. This activation breaches the commitments made by the US in the US-EU agreements of 1997 and 1998. We will avail ourselves of all appropriate measures to address the effects of the Helms-Burton Act, including in relation to our WTO rights and through the use of the EU blocking statute. That statute protects against the extraterritorial application of those U.S. sanctions to U.S. citizens, businesses, and NGOs operating in Cuba. Mr. President, for the European Union, international cooperation, dialogue, and closer, even critical engagement are the way to go where Cuba is concerned. The provisional application of the EU-Cuba Political Dialogue and Cooperation Agreement, the PDCA, is now in its 6th year. The agreement has put our bilateral relationship on new and solid legal footing. It sets forth an agenda of critical engagement with Cuba that will also allow us to support and accompany Cuba on its path of reform and modernization. We are enhancing dialogue and cooperation also on issues on which we still have fundamental differences. To this end, the aforementioned PDCA has established a human rights dialogue as a key pillar of our relationship. The 4th formal meeting of the dialogue is scheduled to be held on the 24th of November. Following the adoption of the country's new constitution and in order to overcome the current economic and social crisis, we call upon Cuba to ensure that its reform agenda extends economic, judicial, and social reforms, and to ensure that it is implemented in a manner that addresses the key concerns of the Cuban people. Moreover, its implementation must meet the legitimate democratic aspirations of the Cuban people for more opportunities to participate in shaping the country's future. The PDCA is an agreement that allows the EU to offer Cuba a consistent and reliable partnership to support Cuba as it seeks to reform its political and economic model, to pursue sustainable development, and to find common solutions to global challenges, while continuing to advocate democracy and for the respect of human rights in the interests of all human citizens. It is our considered view that the U.S. embargo does not contribute to promoting these aims. On the contrary, it hinders their achievement. Against this backdrop, the member states of the European Union voted unanimously in favor of the draft resolution. Thank you.
I thank the delegation.